It's time for another WrestlePlanet news update, as AEW have signed a former NBA player, top UFC fighters get physical on AEW Rampage, and a TNA Legend makes his AEW debut. All that and more coming up in today's video, but first, let's take a look at this week's ratings for WWE Monday Night Raw as well as AEW Dynamite from Wednesday night. Both shows came in strong, with AEW hosting the Grand Slam Special Edition, whilst WWE featured Universal Champion Roman Reigns, who is typically exclusive to the SmackDown brand. As for Raw, they were up just over 7% from last week's 1.67 million, jumping to 1.86 million overall viewers. As for the all-important key demo, they rose a big 14%, going from a 0.43 to a 0.49, which represents roughly 642,000 viewers between the age of 18 and 49. As for Dynamite, AEW drew their third biggest audience of all time, bringing in 1.273 million viewers, which is an increase of just over 8% from last week's 1.175 million. For the key demo, they were just shy of Raw, bringing in a rating of 0.48, up 9% from last week's 0.44. This is 15,000 short of the Red brand, totaling roughly 627,000 in the key 18 to 49 demographic. This is also the fifth week in a row that AEW was ranked number 1 for the night in the Cable 150. Following this week's episode of Impact Wrestling, another title match was confirmed, this time for the Knockouts Championship. Impact Knockouts champion Deonna Purrazzo is set to take on the challenge of veteran Mickie James, who has held the title 3 times in the past. On Impact this week, EVP Scott D'Amore would make the match official, despite Purrazzo initially rejecting the proposal for a match. This is now the third bout confirmed for Bound for Glory, joining the Call Your Shots Gauntlet, with the winner earning a title shot of their choosing, as well as an Impact World Championship match with Christian Cage defending his title against Josh Alexander, who has just cashed in his Option C clause of his X Division title. Now let's get to a quick WWE related story, as a former member of the shambolic Retribution stable has been handed a brand new gimmick. During a dark match before last night's WWE SmackDown, Shane Thorne, formerly known as Slapjack, appeared as a character seemingly inspired by Crocodile Dundee and the Crocodile Hunter. Thorne, who was born in Perth, Australia, must have mentioned his birthplace to WWE higher-ups, who've used their creative prowess to come up with the most stereotypical gimmick possible for the Aussie. In the match, he would go on to defeat Austin Theory in singles action, which follows a loss to Keith Lee last week, again in a dark match, although this is the first time that he's used his new gimmick. This week, AEW star Matt Hardy appeared in an interview with Post Wrestling to discuss the evolving AEW roster, which continues to add top stars to the mix. Following the recent signings of CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, and Adam Cole, with many more names expected, Hardy revealed that he thinks Edge could have been added to that list had WWE not cleared him for action, and he said, "That was one of those things too. I think if WWE hadn't cleared Edge and let him wrestle, he was going to end up at AEW. So they kind of had to go, oh, if we don't want him to go, we've got to let him have his way." Edge was forced to retire in 2011 following neck injuries, however he was eventually cleared to compete in 2020, where he returned to WWE in the Royal Rumble. There was reports that AEW were in talks with Edge before his big return, and it seems likely that had WWE not agreed to let him wrestle, he'd currently be All Elite. Next up, following recent rumours that AEW will be adding a Trios title to the mix, former AEW Tag Team Champions the Young Bucks have added fuel to the fire following a recent change of their Twitter bio. The Bucks would say, "Give us the Trios title, #SuperClick." The Super Click is the name of Adam Cole and the Young Bucks as a collective, and AEW recently filed to trademark the term and also released merchandise with the name. According to Andrew Zarian of the Mat Men podcast, the Trios titles will be one of 2 new belts coming to the promotion, joined by a Women's TBS Championship, which will act as the secondary title in the women's division. Following the Young Bucks' loss to the Lucha Brothers at All Out, it seems they now have their focus set on making history by becoming the first ever AEW Trios Champions. All Elite Wrestling this week announced the signing of a brand new talent, with Satnam Singh becoming All Elite. Singh is a former basketball player for the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA and is the first ever Indian player to be drafted. He comes in at 7'3" and will become the second ever former NBA player to compete in AEW, following Shaquille O'Neal's mixed tag appearance earlier this year. AEW President Tony Khan would release a statement on the signing and said, "While we recently secured some of the hottest free agents on the planet, I'm also deeply committed to cultivating our own homegrown stars and the next generation of extraordinary professional wrestlers." In addition to Satnam's commanding 7'3" stature, I was impressed by his high level of athleticism and charisma. He's an exciting addition to our roster, and I'm looking forward to our fans getting to know Satnam's personality and watching his development. This news follows a recent partnership between AEW and Eurosport India, who now air Dynamite and Rampage in the second largest country in the world by population. This past Friday night, CM Punk's first television match in 7 years aired on the Grand Slam edition of AEW Rampage, where he took on Powerhouse Hobbs of Team Taz. The match saw the return of Punk's previous WWE attire, with him donning trunks as opposed to the long tights that he wore at AEW All Out. Not only that, but we saw the return of the infamous Macho Man elbow, a move he used often before his retirement in 2014. Despite interference from Hobbs' stablemate Hook, Punk was able to come away with the win after a GTS. This means Punk's record in AEW is 2-0 as he looks to push himself into contention in the AEW rankings. And quickly, just before we continue, make sure you drop a like on the video as it helps me out a lot, and make sure you subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss any upcoming wrestling content as we head, hopefully, towards 100,000 subscribers. But now, let's press play on the video. Over the past few weeks, popular AEW star Orange Cassidy has been targeted by Matt Hardy and his Hardy family office, and this week on Rampage the stakes were taken to a new level. During a backstage promo, Hardy would reveal that he's challenging Cassidy to a hair versus hair match, although it won't be himself competing. Instead, Matt nominated his client Jack Evans to fight on his behalf, a decision that Evans didn't seem too pleased about. This follows incidents where Matt Hardy has shaved the head of an Orange Cassidy fan, as well as an attempted head shave of Ortiz this week. It was recently reported that a hair versus hair match was being considered between Britt Baker and Thunder Rosa, but it seems that AEW have shifted gears, giving the stipulation to the Matt Hardy Orange Cassidy feud instead. Also on Rampage, a major UFC star got physical, dropping former AEW World Champion Chris Jericho in the process. On the show, Jericho would team with his Inner Circle teammate Jake Hager to take on the Men of the Year, Scorpio Sky and Ethan Page in tag team action. Page and Sky would come away with the win following interference from American Top Team leader Dan Lambert, which led to a post-match attack by members of his MMA gym. UFC BMF champion Jorge Masvidal would make his way through the crowd, joined by former UFC heavyweight champions Andrei Arlovski and Junior Dos Santos, as well as former UFC flyweight fighter and current bare knuckle boxer Paige Van Zandt, as well as top Bellator middleweight Austin Vanderford as backup. The MMA fighters would beat Jericho and Hager down before Masvidal would recreate his infamous flying knee that would knock out Ben Askren at UFC 239 in a mere 5 seconds, but this time hitting Jericho. It's unknown if Masvidal, who is arguably the biggest name on the Grand Slam show altogether, will continue to appear in AEW, but if he did, it would bring a ton of eyes to the product. So much so that I'm surprised this segment was reserved for Rampage rather than the live Dynamite. And for our final story from Rampage, current Ring of Honor star and TNA legend Homicide would make his AEW debut, suggesting that ROH are now part of the Forbidden Door trades. During the close of the night's main event, which saw Eddie Kingston and Jon Moxley take on Minoru Suzuki and Lance Archer in a lights out tag match, Homicide would make an appearance to free up Moxley's hands that had been tied up with duct tape, leading to a victory for Mox and Kingston. The three men would then celebrate before the show came to an end. After things went off air, Eddie Kingston would declare that New York belongs to AEW, and he said, "Before certain people got here, we sold this mother out, and we put our flag down in New York in dirt. But with those people, CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, that just joined us, we've retook our flag and put it in cement. New York is now AEW's town." AEW will return to New York in the UBS Arena, a venue in which WWE are running the week before. Right now, AEW are outdoing their competition in ticket sales for their respective shows, and WWE have long been nicknamed New York, which is where they were based during the territory days, but AEW have continued to make great strides taking over the market in the Big Apple. And before you go, make sure you check out my video where I discussed the secret wrestling returns of CM Punk before he showed up in AEW.